The Cameron Parker Show takes a dive into all the main professional sports teams in Colorado. For instance, the Denver Broncos, with insight from numerous contributors.
Maybe Kirk Cousins wasn't, in essence, that guy when he was at Michigan State, but he certainly has really assumed a true leader mentality when he was with the Washington Redskins, and he's really kind of taken it to another step. Baker Mayfield, he has it in college, and so to even think about the Broncos team on offense, that's the type of player that offense needs, and especially with the kind of swagger that the defense has. It's a guy that could really transform an offense just by himself alone. Editor, writer for Predominantly Orange, Sayer Bettinger is just one of many to talk about those Denver Broncos.
We love the competition of football, and that's why, a lot of fans want the Broncos to win the competition of getting Kirk Cousins, and that's maybe even more what it's about for those fans than, necessarily wanting to get the best quarterback available, because honestly, it might be smarter to go after Keenum and draft somebody. I mean, financially, and you might get a better long-term player than Cousins. You never know.
Also on deck on the Cameron Parker Show is the Colorado Rockies.
I called it a re-audition, so to speak, for Carlos Gonzalez with the Colorado Rockies. And I think if you look at it, you look at where he was, it gives that opportunity for Carlos Gonzalez to really rewrite who he is as a, maybe not rewrite, but just reestablish him as one of the all-time greats. Sean Tafoya drops the puck and gives his takes on the Colorado Avalanche.
I love everything that Eric Johnson says, because he is 100% till the day he dies a Colorado Avalanche, right now. And he said, we want guys that want to be here. We want guys that want to be contenders and win a cup with the Colorado Avalanche. And, every single time he gets interviewed about it, he says, we want to win it for the city of Denver. We as guys want to win it for the city of Denver. And, that's something that should be, I guess, in your locker room. Any locker room that, you're in. You play for the Ducks, you want to win it for Anaheim. You play for Minnesota, hey, let's go out and win it for the state of hockey.
Also, Brandon Stoll is a contributor on the Cameron Parker Show, taking a dive himself to talk about the Denver Nuggets.
It's hard to explain. I know it's not flashy, it's not like Jamal coming out hitting 3 straight threes or dunking on people. But man, Gary Harris, his defense it changes the culture on a team.
It is now time to saddle up with the Cameron Parker Show podcast.
It is mock draft season, or mock draft April, I should say, in the Cameron Parker Show. And joining us on the Cameron Parker Show podcast on Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and a lot of different platforms is Nick Kendell. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a little bit. I've been busy. I think it's been since before the Combine, and I've had a vacation since then and a lot of stuff with my actual job, but getting ready for the draft. I mean, what are we, 3 weeks away, 2 weeks away, less than 3 weeks away. So it's coming up, and thanks for having me on to talk some NFL draft because I absolutely love it.
Absolutely. It's, I think roughly we're about 2.5 weeks out. But yeah, Nick Kendell joins us. You guys, I'm sure you guys have heard him before. He is the draft analyst, writer, host of the Huddle Up Pod, as well as the writer for Mile High Huddle, draft analyst or draft guru, maybe. I don't know. Would you consider yourself a guru?
I don't think of myself that highly or that snobbishly to call myself a guru. I would just say I'm an analyst, and I put it out there. I'm a writer and an analyst. I don't try to be a beat guy. I try to go to the beyond that. So a lot of people, journalism, it's who, what, when, where, and I try to fill in that last part, the why and how. It probably comes from me being a scientist. I don't really care. I do care about the details, but I want the nuts and bolts. I want the specifics. I want to know why things work and how they work. So that's what I'm here. That's what I'm here for, and that's what I'm about.
I like that. It's more the humble way of, and I mean, the guru is the more, I guess, popular term when you think of something like that. And but I think I like that. It's just a more humble way to go about it as far as, what you do. And I appreciate that. But Nick, thank you very much for tuning in, for coming on to the Cameron Parker Show podcast. Sayer and I did one, and I tell you, mock draft season is incredible because it really is the ultimate poker game. It's also the biggest appetizer that's not the NFL free agency, but it's the biggest appetizer before you get into training camp and before, or it solidifies all your rosters. It's the biggest poker game to maybe solidifying a roster that for a sake of argument, pick and choose the Denver Broncos because that's the local team here. They're 5-11, but yet maybe to some degree they might be a better 5-11 team than people give them credit for because they still have players on their roster and decent players at that. But there's still holes that they need to be filled. So it allows the Broncos to, solidify them come the NFL draft. So the NFL draft is really kind of that area where it's the biggest poker game, but yet there's holes to be filled.
Yeah, there are holes to be filled across the roster, but that's true for the team picking first, the Browns, all the way to the team picking 32 with the Eagles, and that's what makes the draft so unique. Every single team, is looking to get better, and it's a fun, unique way to bring in talent, and there's no exact way to do this right. There's a lot of different opinions, and there's factors that you can't even evaluate or can't know based on future or the player's heart or their determination or the scheme they go in, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a fun opportunity for fans and analysts alike to put in their information and put in their work and have opinions out there. And 5-10 years from now, we can see where the chips fall and who is right and who is wrong.
Well, in this mock draft scenario between you and I, you will do the odd numbers and I will do the even numbers. Cleveland, it feels like, really, it seems like they've had the number one overall pick for 3 decades. It feels like, it's one of those cases where it's almost kind of like when Cleveland and the NBA had the number one overall pick in the lottery, or just numerous times, or even the Oklahoma City Thunder.
How about not the Phillies, the 76ers?
Yeah, that's probably a more current example. The 76ers, yeah, and then now you're starting to see them, play well and into the postseason. So I think for the Browns, I think they're in the step in the right direction, and even though they didn't have the general manager Dorsey there last year, they're in a really good place with picks 1 and 4 to the point where they could, if they wanted to, build off of their last 2 drafts, which was, Myles Garrett and Jabril Peppers and David Njoku. And then now they have the number 1 overall pick again with also number 4. So Cleveland really is in a pretty good situation considering they did upgrade their quarterback position.
Yeah, I agree. And they're in a unique opportunity too in this draft that they get to pick whatever quarterback they want. And I've been told that part of Dorsey getting the position of the Cleveland Browns general manager is that he told the owner, Hazlitt, of the Browns, that he's using that first pick on a quarterback. So it's not going any other way. And I guess I'll kick it off. The guy who's going to be going number 1, you at me on Twitter. I got a Venmo. We can bet on it if you don't believe me, but it's going to be Sam Darnold, and I'm not going to switch it up or shake it up too much here. I'm going to have Sam Darnold going here. He's tied for my second-rated quarterback in this class with Baker Mayfield, but I think for the Browns system and everything that they have going there, also from a personality fit, which matters for these quarterbacks, I think Darnold's the pick here, and that's been the case since the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, he really is the surefire pick, really. The pick that probably is the most understandable, even from it feels like a few months back. You said it. Sam Darnold would be the pick at 1. The Giants are now on the clock, and it's a really interesting team because both the Giants and the Jets kind of hold the cards potentially of what could happen, maybe of the quarterbacks that could potentially fall. They could not go quarterback if they wanted to. They traded they traded Jason Pierre-Paul, which opened the possibility that maybe they wanted to go after Bradley Chubb. So there's a lot of different ways that they could go. And, I was bringing this up to Sayre just as a more anonymous point or more miscellaneous point. I think this is the first time, whether, and there's talk that Buffalo, maybe not in this mock draft, but just there's talks that Buffalo may move up to number 2. But I think this is the first time that I can recall a New York back-to-back picks, New York and New York, and that I can certainly remember, of New York and the New York Giants or the New York Jets, or whether it was vice versa or whatever. I feel like it's the first time that that's ever happened, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what the Giants do in real life. But here, I'm sorry to do it, Nick. The Giants are going to be taking Josh Rosen at number 2.
That's A-okay. He should be the pick here. I think he's a good fit. I do wonder if Eli starts to struggle, if that could create an issue in the locker room, because Josh Rosen's never been a guy who's been super humble. He thinks he's the best quarterback in the class, and it's not something I hold against him. So if Eli starts struggling, I could see some tension there. But I think when you're the Giants and you have a chance to get a quarterback of Josh Rosen's caliber, you're drafting up here, unless somebody offers you something absolutely insane, you sit there and take the quarterback. And the best one on the board, in my opinion, is Josh Rosen.
Yeah. And I think from all intents and purposes, I just think that it with Rosen in general, he might, and I guess that's really the argument for any quarterback of the top 3, I should say, Josh Allen is still that project potentially, if we want to use that term, but there's still people out there that believe that Josh Allen is that guy. But as far as the top 3 guys for us, it's Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, and Baker Mayfield. And so I think that of those, that's the most ready, for the pros. And this certainly would signal that the Giants are ready for the future, despite the fact that they may seem pretty confident in Eli Manning. So I think it's kind of maybe a scenario of where, if we get to it, the Broncos pick, of wanting to solidify the future with the quarterback that they already have.
Yeah, when you're drafting this high and you have a chance at a quarterback long-term and you don't have a long-term guy there's one available, I think it would be silly not to take the guy. So Rosen makes sense here. There's opportunity to trade down, but look, case in point, the Browns over the last few seasons. 2 years ago, they had the number 2 pick in the draft. They traded down to get more guys. You know who that pick went on to be?
Who was
Carson
the pick?
Wentz. Carson Wentz. They could have had Carson Wentz. Last season, they traded down and they had a chance. There was some talk that they tried to trade up for a quarterback at number 2. That's one of the reasons the Bears moved up. But they had a chance at a quarterback and they traded down. You know who that quarterback went on to be?
It was last year.
Yep, last year.
I can't. Not Jared Goff. What's the?
Deshaun Watson.
I can't remember the name.
Deshaun Watson.
I'm so focused on the 2018 draft that names are starting to escape my brain.
It's all good. So they've had a chance at Wentz and Watson past few years, and instead they traded down, and, well, look what that's gotten them. You're filling out that roster, but as long as you don't have that quarterback your team believes in, odds are it's going to be a struggle. So go get that guy, and I think the Giants going there makes a lot of sense. With the 3rd pick, if I was the Jets, I would go for Baker Mayfield, but all talk I've heard is that they are not as likely to go for Baker Mayfield. I've heard that he doesn't fit their size requirements, and I'm going to trust my source. There's smoke screen right now, but I'm going to go with my source that I've heard from, and it makes sense to me. So I think they traded up for Josh Allen, and I am praying that Josh Allen is off the board before the Broncos pick, because I do not want him anywhere near Denver.
Yeah. And I think really Josh Allen is kind of that scary pick, I guess, because there's certainly the potential there. And I've said all along that with Josh Allen, there's that quarterback that he himself, as far as maybe talent himself, is a first round pick. With his arm and the measurables and everything like that. But then you get to the decision making and inconsistencies. That's really where it comes into play as far as him being that when you watch the film, as far as it being a turnoff. So it's a scary proposition. But in this case, it also presents the fact that the draft now has history. It's the first time since 1999 that quarterbacks went 1, 2, and 3.
And I don't think it'll be the last time, because you're seeing what's happened with teams like the Seahawks when they had their run, or just this past season, the Rams and the Eagles. They have their franchise quarterback on that rookie deal, that slotted deal. There's a little bit of nuance to the guaranteed money and everything, but for the most part, those contracts are slotted, so that makes those quarterbacks even more valuable because they're controlled. You have guys like Ezekiel Elliott and Leonard Fournette, who are drafted in the top 5 at running back. Those are the top 2 contracts in the NFL for guaranteed money for a running back. So there's a huge argument against running back early. If you're getting a quarterback, that's actually a huge bargain. So it makes sense, and I think we're going to see more and more teams. I mean, over the past few years, we're starting to see this trend, but more and more teams, if there's a viable starting quarterback in there, their teams are going to trade up and they're going to go get that guy early.
Yeah. Well, the Cleveland Browns, now we said it, that they're in that really interesting situation now where they can continue to build for the future. With the three first-round picks that they had last year, we said it, Myles Garrett, Jabril Peppers, David Njoku. In the offseason, they got Drew Stanton, Tyrod Taylor, really securing the quarterback position at least, and then going after and getting Carlos Hyde. So Duke Johnson is in their running back stable. Carlos Hyde is now in their running back stable. They don't have to go Saquon Barkley if they want. And probably of the biggest of note is that Joe Thomas retired, maybe leaving a pretty significant void in offensive tackle. And I think, I think that Quentin Nelson, I'm not saying that he could end up being the pick here, because I'm not going to pick him, not to spoil anything, but Quentin Nelson, I think could end up being an option here just because of the fact that, and it's one of my pet peeves as far as people labeling Quentin Nelson as just a guard. I mean, he's flexible to the point where he can be a tackle. And I think he might be considered here. However, I think that, Philadelphia itself created a model, and the Denver Broncos did too, that you have to have a plethora of pass rushers at your disposal. And I think that if you're Cleveland and you have the opportunity to take Bradley Chubb at 4, I would take it. And so I think that Cleveland Browns take Bradley Chubb.
I think that will be the pick. That's how it's going to shape up right now. And that makes a lot of sense. You get a guy, they have Agba there, they have Carl Nassib on the outside, but it's never a bad idea to stack pass rushers, and to get a guy like Myles Garrett and Chubb on the outside going forward, cheap young guys that can get after the quarterback, and pair it with the already franchise quarterback at 1 with Darnold. I mean, you don't even have to get him there right away because I got Tyrod Taylor. Just makes a lot of sense, and you take on your board, the best quarterback in the draft and the best non-quarterback in the draft, both at positions of value. So that's a slam dunk for the Browns, and that's how I foresee it happening if the draft were today, unless the Bills are head over heels for Mayfield and want to move up and get him. But I think for now, the Browns already have 3 second-round picks. So I think right now it makes sense that the Browns stay put and take the best player on their board, and I think that would be Chubb at this case. With the 5th pick, I'm going to take my number 2 quarterback, my number 2A quarterback, in Baker Mayfield, and just be happy that the Broncos got a quarterback. Baker Mayfield makes a lot of sense for the Broncos. There's been a lot of smoke, and where there's smoke, there's fire. This is not a smoke screen. I think the interest is very much real, and he makes a lot of sense from a offensive standpoint as well. Baker Mayfield is like the A-plus version of Case Keenum. They can come in, they can play similar offenses, and it's not going to be a crazy, back and forth, different types of offenses like the issues you had with Simeon and Lynch the past couple of years. These guys can play the same offense, they can run it well, and I think Baker does everything well that you need in today's NFL. He's not playing in the AFC North. There are going to be some bad weather games, which is why a team like the Jets and the Bills might favor a guy like Josh Allen. But I think the game's changing. You want guys that are accurate to the intermediate short part. He has enough arm talent. He has enough size. He has especially some some mass to him as well. And he's one of the better processors and accurate passers in this class. So I think Baker Mayfield's very high on the Broncos board. And if he is available, I think he will be the pick.
And we think of, as far as, surefire picks, we're talking about Sam Darnold as being the surefire pick. And with Cleveland, I mean, honestly, if you look through the whole process with how they've interviewed Baker Mayfield, and everything that they've conducted with Baker Mayfield, there is no doubt in my mind that it's not a smokescreen. I mean, they basically had interviewed him, I would say, at least once in the Senior Bowl. And then they ended up having him in for the combine interview. Then they had him in or visit him during his pro day, where they basically sent the entire posse to go visit Baker Mayfield along with Josh Rosen. I mean, those really are the two top quarterbacks, according to them, in my imagination. And so I think that it makes a lot of sense for the Broncos that even if, there's still some holes, and I understand the arguments, I mean, of why not to go to a quarterback at 5, because there's greater needs. But it's like you said earlier with Josh Rosen at 2, when you have that opportunity to take a quarterback at 5, or just a franchise quarterback that is going to solidify your team and maybe the biggest position on your roster, you have to take it. So Baker Mayfield makes a lot of sense.
And I would argue that if you don't have a franchise quarterback in your roster, there is no greater need. So, I mean, you have Case Keenum on a 2-year deal. Well, guess what? Veldheer's about the same age and similar contract. You have an issue for a cornerback 3, but that doesn't come close to a franchise quarterback. You could use another pass rusher again. Doesn't come close to a franchise quarterback. So I would say franchise quarterback is need number 1 until it's not. So that's what I went with here.
Well, the Indianapolis Colts are in a interesting proposition because they could go a lot of ways. Their defense has been suspect over what feels like a decade, even with Peyton Manning. But the offensive line, is been so suspect as far as protecting Andrew Luck and trying to keep him healthy that it makes a lot of sense that if you're the Indianapolis Colts and you are wanting to upgrade your offensive line, and maybe the two teams that would absolutely love Quentin Nelson are the Colts and the Chicago Bears. And I think that if you're the Chicago Bears, you would love if the Indianapolis Colts did not take Quentin Nelson. But if I'm running this entire Indianapolis Colts franchise, I'm drafting Quentin Nelson because I want to secure the franchise and make the smart decision. This is the rare occasion, I guess, of doing the smart decision and the sexy decision and protecting your quarterback. So I'm going to go Quentin Nelson, Notre Dame guard for the Indianapolis Colts.
And Bears fans everywhere are sad. But you know what? There are other guards in this class, so they can look elsewhere. And I agree with you. I think this will be the pick as well. I wouldn't sleep on Roquan Smith potentially being a guy here as well, or Denzel Ward, because Ballard has made continuous comments that he wants to add speed to that Colts defense, and those are two of the better athletes at their position. So some guys to watch out for there as well. Now I am with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If you didn't go Quentin Nelson, I was probably going to go with him there. But instead, I am going to go with what many people feel is the best running back in this class and one of the best running backs in the past few seasons, Saquon Barkley. I like Barkley a lot. He isn't the best running back, in my opinion, over the past 5 years. That would belong to Zeke Elliott, who I thought was a tier better as far as running between the tackles and vision. Barkley is a guy who he can run between the tackles, but he runs rather passively for a guy who's 230 pounds. He doesn't really lower that shoulder and gain extra yards. He'd rather try to juke a guy, which is fine. I wish he could square up sometimes and get some few extra hard-earned yards. And I wish he was a little bit better between the tackles. But he's a very unique weapon. He can be used as like a Super Saiyan version of Christian McCaffrey because I think he has great potential as a receiver, a guy that can even flex out into slot as well. Not to the same extent McCaffrey could, but I think he has that upside to do that. And adding him to the Buccaneers, they took O.J. Howard last year. You're making sure Jameis Winston has weapons. I know they need defense, but they went out and got some guys. I think they got the edge rusher from the Eagles, Curry. and they can get some edge or some defensive guys day 2 as well. But Barkley's a unique weapon here, and it really helps out your young franchise quarterback and Jameis Winston, who always did better when he could play off a running game and a better weapon back there. So Saquon Barkley to the Bucs with the 7th pick.
And with the Chicago Bears, it kind of puts them in a quandary because they were really hoping that Quentin Nelson would have been there. And I mean, as far as, maybe the Los Angeles Rams, there may not have been a team that had a more successful offseason and, putting all the tools together for Mitchell Trubisky and hiring a really good coach that could fit with Mitchell Trubisky and then adding those weapons around him, getting Allen Robinson and all the tools that they were able to put around him. It would make sense to protect Mitchell Trubisky. So if Quentin Nelson was not drafted by Indianapolis, I would almost bet that Quentin Nelson is the pick with Chicago if it wasn't, again, with the Colts picks. So, but I think here, it puts forth, questions. I think that, if Quentin Nelson is not there, where do they go? And, I mean, could we see a run on corner or, going after maybe an offensive lineman, another offensive lineman? I'm going to take a chance, and I'm actually going to say that Derwin James is the pick here, if in fact that Quentin Nelson is not the pick for the Chicago Bears. So Derwin James to Chicago.
That's the first pick I've disagreed with so far. I think the Bears have 2 pretty good safeties. I mean, he's definitely an option, but they have Amos, who's a third-year player who played pretty well last season, and one of the better draft steals last season in Eddie Jackson. So Derwin James, I mean, you get yourself 3 safeties, but if I were the Bears in that situation, I think I'd be looking potentially Harold Landry, edge rusher, so valuable to get after that guy opposite Leonard Floyd, or one of the linebackers, Roquan Smith / Tremaine Edmonds, and potentially Denzel Ward. But you're the even, so Derwin James it is, Florida State.
Is he flexible enough to play corner?
I would not play Derwin at corner. I think, if anything, he could be a more of a dime backer type, but I think he's best as a strong safety. So how much 3 safety sets you're going to need? I mean, if you get a guy like Derwin, you can play more 3 safety sets. But I think the Bears, if I were the Bears, I would have looked elsewhere just because I'm a really big fan of Eddie Jackson, and I like Amos a fair amount as well. All right, so now
the 49ers.
Yep, 49ers. 49ers are on the clock, and they used an early selection last year on the linebacker position, but if you know anything, you've been following what's been going on with Reuben Foster, he looks like a space case. Thank God the Broncos took Garrett Bowles instead of him, because this guy might be not Roquan Smith. That's what I'm taking, Roquan Smith. But Reuben Foster might already be out of the league. So I'm going to take the best linebacker in this draft, in my opinion, at least the safest linebacker in this draft, because I think he has a skill set that translates over very well and excellent instincts. He's not the best taking on blockers because he's a little bit smaller, but he weighs about 236 pounds, and he can play sideline to sideline and play coverage. He's a 3-down linebacker, and the 49ers could use some help there. So I'm going with Roquan Smith, linebacker from Georgia, with the 9th pick.
Well, that leaves with the Oakland Raiders, and unfortunately for John Gruden, he can't draft a player that's over 30 years old.
Yeah.
But that said, Roquan Smith probably would have been the pick for the Oakland Raiders had San Francisco not taken him. But luckily, there's another athletic freak at linebacker that's only 19 years old and could end up being maybe a better linebacker prospect than Roquan Smith when all is said and done, just because of the versatility to rush the passer. And I think if you're Oakland, you have to go with Tremaine Edmonds here. It's one of those potential game changers of a defense, in my opinion. The ability for him to just be so flexible, or maybe even be kind of that Anthony Barr. And I just think that it makes a lot of sense for Oakland that had Roquan Smith not been the pick, then it makes a ton of sense for Tremaine Edmonds to be the guy.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. So now the Dolphins are on the clock, and this is the team that could use talent. I mean, a lot of places on this roster right now. They have a fair amount of issues. They could use some help in that secondary. I think Derwin James would have been the pick here if he was available, but he's not. So I'm going to go with the best secondary player or back seven player available on the board for me, and that is Denzel Ward. I think Denzel Ward is a very solid cornerback from the University of or Ohio State University, the Ohio State University, as they say. And he reminds me a lot of Pac-Man Jones, maybe a Jason Verrett. He is just under 5'11". He's probably one of the more explosive athletes in this entire draft class, and he's one of the few that I trust to play man corner, inside, outside. He does have some faults. We wish he'd be a little bit bigger. I wish he had a little bit better ball skills. He does get his hand on a fair amount of balls, but he doesn't really make great interception attempts, but he's sticky. He's always in dudes' hip pockets, and he's going to have some issues bodying against the big jump ball guys, DeAndre Hopkins of the world, Julio Jones types, but Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham types, he can stick with them as good as anyone and cover them. So I think he's not as good as Marshawn Lattimore last year or Tre'Davious White. I think he's just a tier under them, but I think he's going to be a very good cornerback, and the adds to the Miami Dolphin cornerback group, which they have Cordrea Tankersley and Xavier Howard, both longer guys, so they can get a guy like Denzel Ward who complements those two very well. Just a totally different type of cornerback.
I think it makes a ton of sense. I think if we go back to the quarterback position, the Buffalo Bills are in desperate need to be adding a quarterback. They really do need a starter. They traded Tyrod Taylor to Cleveland. So there is a dire spot open for a quarterback. And if you're Buffalo, I think you absolutely have to take a quarterback here. Now, considering the run on quarterbacks that we had, I think they absolutely would have loved to have, either one of Baker Mayfield or Josh Rosen, or maybe even Josh Allen. So I think if you're Buffalo, and due to where it's falling, I think I would maybe take the chance and draft a guy like Lamar Jackson. He's athletic. I think that he's the athletic version of Michael Vick, and I think that it's not a slight to Michael Vick in any way, but I think that Lamar Jackson has the capability to last a lot longer in the NFL and as a quarterback, just for the simple fact that, for one, he's right-handed, and two, he's 6'3", and I think that people at times forget that he's over 6 feet tall. And I mean, I think for me, the reason why I do like Lamar Jackson, maybe not some more than all the others, but just he has shown the ability to get better every single year, at least when he was with Louisville. There's still a lot of question marks. I mean, but as far as the athlete in him, you can't take top 5 potential athlete, whether it's a quarterback or whatever. He is a top 5 athlete, and I think that Buffalo would love Lamar Jackson in Buffalo.
Yeah, he makes sense. I think they'd be a little bit disappointed that they missed out on their top guys. I'm not sure how much they like Baker Mayfield compared to Lamar Jackson. Based on things I've heard, I think Rosen, Darnold, or Allen are their targets, but who knows? I mean, it's smokescreen season, and half the stuff you hear is true and half of it's not. So we'll see. Mm-hmm. Redskins are now on the clock, and the Redskins have needs across the roster, and I'm going to go with a guy who used to be considered a top 10 pick in this range, but I thought that was a little bit overrated. I thought he was a 10 to 15 pick, and it just makes sense right here for the Redskins. Minkah Fitzpatrick, he is a defensive back, safety, nickelback leader, and he really helps that back end for the Redskins. They probably would look quarterback here. They got Smith, who's going to be a solid fit for them, and it doesn't fall that way. So Minkah Fitzpatrick makes a lot of sense to me, and I think he's a strong target and considered player here for the Redskins with the 13th pick.
Well, and considering they traded a guy that would have been maybe that athletic freak that could have played corner and safety and Sua Cravens, but he's kind of a Denver Bronco right now. So I think that Minkah Fitzpatrick type player is just a guy that's going to be much, much better than Sua Cravens, or at least a lot more versatile of a player than what Sua was. That leaves the Green Bay Packers, and they absolutely need defense on that side of the ball. And I think ultimately, if you're looking at, I think with what they certainly could use, I think they absolutely do need a corner. You think of how depleted that the defensive backs were the past 2 years. I mean, there may have, at least in my opinion, there was no plagued defensive back core than the Green Bay Packers the last 2 years. And so ultimately, I think that does this end up maybe leaving for a reach? Maybe. But I do think that Isaiah Oliver has the chance to potentially be a pick here for Green Bay, and I think that they take him.
Oh man, I think that's a little bit early for Oliver. I think he has some issues playing press man. If he's not as physical as I'd hoped for on the outside for a boundary cornerback, but he's long and he's athletic. So I mean that gets guys drafted pretty early. So I'm just looking at the board right now. We're 14 picks through. I'm surprised that no interior defensive linemen have been discussed yet, and we haven't at all talked about. We have talked about him, but he hasn't gone yet. Harold Landry. I don't think Harold Landry gets past the top 14 picks. I think the edge rushes need is too much, and he has a unique skill set in terms of his burst and bend that teams really covet. So we'll see there. Looking at the Cardinals, they have a few needs across the board. I would take Landry here. I'm definitely considering that, but they have Chandler Jones, who they like a lot, and Hassan Reddick plays there. Marcus Golden. I mean, they're decently deep there, so it just doesn't make super sense for them here, unfortunately. So I am going to go with my best offensive player left on the board, and that is Connor Williams from Texas. There is some discussion. Is he going to be a guard? Is he going to be a tackle? That's yet to be seen, but I think he can play either in the NFL, and that gives them some versatility. They brought in a guy like Andre Smith, who's kind of a journeyman at this point, to play right tackle. Might not make it. So getting a guy in there that like Connor Williams, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Now that kind of leaves the Baltimore Ravens, and while I think it's interesting that even though they signed Michael Crabtree, and I think Michael Crabtree, despite how I feel about him being a Broncos fan, I think that Michael Crabtree certainly is a very underrated wide receiver. I mean, he's great as far as a possession receiver. He understands how to run routes. He's crisp, but at the same time, he does shrink at times in some games. And I think that leaves the possibility that as far as the players that they've had, Brashad Perriman and ever since the days of losing Steve Smith there, they really haven't had a wide receiver that kind of has taken a stranglehold. And they need a guy that could potentially be that Amari Cooper to what Michael Crabtree was. And so I mean, do I think that they might take a reach and maybe go after inside linebacker? I think it's possible. I mean, there's potential buzz that Leighton Vander Esch is going to be moving into the first round, and within, I should say, that range potentially. So Leighton Vander Esch could be the pick. However, I think ultimately, if you're Baltimore, you have to protect Joe Flacco, and I'm going to take Colton Miller. Interesting. He's going to play right tackle?
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, they have Ronnie Stanley across there. I see Colton Miller go in the first round, but I see him going later in the first round. All right, so now the Chargers are on the board, and the Chargers are a unique team. They need some talent back end. and they could look for some offensive line help as well. So I think that's kind of the identity of this team going forward. They have some good players, but they've been addressing that offensive line. They'll get Forrest Lamp back next year. So I'm going to add the best offensive lineman left on the board here, and I can't believe Colton Miller went before him, but I'm going with Mike McGlinchey, offensive tackle from Notre Dame. I think he's a perfect fit for a right tackle. Reminds me a lot of former Raven, now Detroit Lion right tackle in Ricky Wagner from the University of Wisconsin. And I think McGlinchey is going to be a solid tackle at this level. He doesn't have the athletic upside that Miller does, but he sustains blocks very well. He understands angles, and he's shown that he can play both the left and the right side of the offensive line. So I think he's a solid pick here, and that really helps solidify the Chargers' offensive line. I mean, you got Okung, you got Lamp, and now you got McGlinchey. So that's going to open it up for Phillip Rivers. It's going to open up for Melvin Gordon.
And it may not be plausible that 3 offensive tackles get taken back to back to back. And I mean, I just think that, with the Ravens, I feel like they still have, I guess, that need there. But I mean, there's that potential. I think that, I don't know. I don't know exactly what my thinking was, but I know that they needed some help protecting them. And I think that Seattle, I think they go corner. And so we go back to corner. And I think that you go to the Iowa Hawkeye. I think you go Josh Jackson. I say that Josh Jackson to Seattle makes a lot of sense. They lost Richard Sherman to San Francisco, and he's a zone corner, makes a lot of sense in Seattle. It seems like a seamless fit as far as a cornerback. Seattle, Josh Jackson, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, he makes a lot of sense, especially for their defense. He's going to have to get better at press technique, but I see him being a good player for them in that role. So now I'm up with the Dallas Cowboys. Man, I keep looking for a spot to take Harold Landry, and it just is not fitting with them so far. Landry he shouldn't be here still, but he just doesn't make sense with the Cowboys with their defense. I mean, they took Taco Charlton in the first last year. They had Tyron Crawford. They have DeMarcus Lawrence, and they have a guy in Randy Gregory, who I'm sure you're aware of, who might come back and had some promising tape when he played at Nebraska. So I'm going to strengthen a strength. A lot of people want to just use the draft to cover in weaknesses, but it's also about strengthening what you already have as a strength. So I'm going to go offensive line here with the Cowboys. I'm going to select Isaiah Wynn. He is going to play offensive guard in this offense. Left guard, an issue that was an issue for the Cowboys all last season. You get a guy like Isaiah Wynn playing between Frederick and Tyron Smith and then Zach Martin on the other side. I mean, this is the best offensive line in the NFL, and you might as well just make it incredibly better than anybody else. That it's the strength of your team and defines you going forward the next 3-4 years.
Not Will Hernandez there?
I think Isaiah Wynn's a little better for the zone.
Okay. That puts us. And the Detroit Lions are in that point where we might actually be getting to the point where, even despite the franchise tag of Ziggy Ansah, they still need that disruptive, defensive end. And I think if you look at, what could potentially be there, Harold Landry, he's there. I mean, he's an outside linebacker, but I think you got to pick Harold Landry here, don't you?
The Detroit Lions would literally be doing backflips if Harold Landry fell to them. I don't see this happening, but he's been heavily linked to them, and they really need more outside edge rushers. I mean, they play in a division with young quarterback Mitchell Trubisky, Aaron Rodgers, and now Kirk Cousins. You got to get guys that can get after the quarterback.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a little shocking that, maybe he and Marcus Davenport, to a certain degree, have fallen this far. I mean, let's be real. Marcus Davenport's not a top 5 player, Charles Casserly. But, I mean, I think he's a first-round talent. But, I mean, will he be drafted there at 5? Absolutely not.
Yeah, I do not disagree with you so far. All right, well, now looking at the Cincinnati Bengals, they're up looking at their roster, they got Cordy Glenn, but they still have plenty of issues along this offensive line. And I think Will Hernandez makes a lot of sense here. He could end up being the best offensive lineman in this class. I think he's a first-round interior offensive lineman, going to play guard, probably left guard, but could play right guard as well, and they could use an upgrade at both spots. So I like this pick a lot for them, and I'm going to go with Will Hernandez, the destroyer, as some like to call him.
Fans are probably getting a little mean because they wish he was there for that first part of the second round. But I'm trying to tell them that, he's going to be going in the first round. It's, that's just exactly the way it's going to end up falling out. It's kind of like that way with Forrest Lamp, I should say, last year, where he just steadily moved up and he was a first-round draft pick. So I think
he actually went in the second round.
Who, Lamp?
Lamp fell. He was the Chargers' first pick in the second round.
Why did I think that he was a first round? Maybe it's just because it was that first pick of the second round or first few picks of the second round that made it seem like he was a first-round pick.
Yeah, he went early, and then he tore his ACL really early in camp, so that was unfortunate for them, and they'll get him back this year.
Well, my apologies. So the Buffalo Bills are on the clock, and we already got the quarterback. Now, this is where I think you might actually see them go wide receiver. Zay Jones had the run-in, I believe it was about a month or two ago. And I know that they like Zay Jones, but, those incidents certainly can creep up and they can create habits. And the best wide receiver is still out there. And I think that if you're Buffalo, you absolutely have to take Calvin Ridley here for Buffalo. And so I think that Calvin Ridley here makes a lot of sense for Buffalo. And then you get the potential duo for the future of Lamar Jackson and Calvin Ridley.
All right, well, that makes sense. I don't have any wide receivers with the first-round grade this year, but Bills need some options. They got to help that quarterback and receiver for them, so good pick. Now, next pick, I'm going to go with Vita Vea for the New England Patriots. They got this pick from the Rams, and Vita Vea is probably the best defensive lineman in this class, interior defensive lineman. He is he's incredibly quick for how big he is, 330-pound guy, very strong at the point of attack, and it's just a typical Patriots move where they had a defensive front player that's probably shouldn't be here where he's at right now and get him in that front and be a blue chip player for the Bill Belichick defense going forward. So Vita Vea from University of Washington going to the 23rd pick.
And that leaves the Carolina Panthers, and they could have gone, I guess, Vita Vea. But they already had, and I think, did they lose Kawan Short? I can't remember. Or not Kawan Short, but they lost Star Latuale. Yeah, that's right. They lost Star Latuale. So they also need help down there. And I think, with the edge rushers potentially, they still need help, I think, with pass rush capability there. And I think that if you can have the opportunity to still get Marcus Davenport maybe late in that first round, or maybe where he could be worthy of in the first round, I would take him. And so I think that if I'm the Carolina Panthers, I can't pass up on the opportunity to take Marcus Davenport.
All right, well, that was going to be my pick here with the Tennessee Titans, so I am back to the drawing board. Titans have been getting a lot of offense recently. They've taken wide receivers pretty early, so I think it's time to focus on that defense again, specifically the defensive front. And I'm kind of a little bit debating here back and forth, but best one still on my board is Rashaan Evans, linebacker from Alabama, and I think he can play inside, outside in that 3-4 defensive front. He can play some edge, can play some off ball, and gives them a talent that they need on that second level. So I think he's the pick here for them.
They became the Tennessee Patriots in the offseason. I mean, getting Deion Lewis and Malcolm Butler.
That's what happens when you get Mike Vrabel. So
I like the hire, Mike Vrabel. He's. I kind of compared him in some ways a little bit to Vance Joseph in a way, just a guy that the players love. He's just a sound coach. I don't know what he might be from year 1 to year 2, but he's a coach that players love.
Yeah.
All right, so we go to the Atlanta Falcons. Now, I think that if you look at the Atlanta Falcons, they absolutely need some defensive line help. I think given the fact that that Vita Vea was still there, and they might have, if they wanted to, move up and go grab Vita Vea. But I think that if you are in Atlanta, I would be pretty happy knowing the fact that you have an athletic defensive tackle by the name of Maurice Hurst. And if you can take Maurice Hurst there at 26, I think that would be great. So I have the Atlanta Falcons taking Maurice Hurst.
Alrighty, I thought you were going somewhere else there. So I'm going to take the guy that I would have taken there with the New Orleans Saints here, picking 27. They're another team that could use some front help. They have Cam Jordan, who's good. They got Sheldon Rankins, who's pretty solid. But you need more guys that can win one-on-one up front. And the offense is already pretty good. So adding defensive talent makes a lot of sense. So I'm taking Taven Bryan from the University of Florida. He can be a penetrator in that defense and attack and get downhill and offer more and more pressure on the quarterback in a division that has some pretty darn talented quarterbacks.
Well, here's an interesting scenario for Pittsburgh because they could go quarterback. And really, Pittsburgh, New England, Jacksonville, they all could go quarterback in the first round. And I think that that's kind of the rare case where this is that 1 year where we may see a significant amount of quarterbacks taken in the first round. And I mean, we've had 4 of the 5 taken in the first 4 of the 5 picks. So it's possible, that, Pittsburgh could be looking at a quarterback here. However, I think that the loss potentially of Ryan Shazier or the scare of Ryan Shazier is going to open the door for them to go inside linebacker. And if they can grab maybe when all is said and done, maybe the best inside linebacker at some point down the road. It's a little high praise, but if you're Pittsburgh, I don't know how to phrase it, but I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I have Leighton Vander Esch taken by the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, he's a player that's been giving them a lot of work, or they've been there's a big guy, good athlete, still a little raw technique-wise, not the best always taking on blocks, but I think he's got tremendous upside and can play 3-4, 4-3. I think he's going to be a good player there. So now the Jacksonville Jaguars, honestly, probably one of the harder teams to pick a actual need. They have depth across the defense, and I guess you could reach on a wide receiver or something like that, but I like adding a strength to a strength, and they have arguably the best cornerback duo in the entire NFL going forward in A.J. Bouye and Jalen Ramsey. So I'm going to take another cornerback here because most of the time you're playing 3 cornerback sets. They lost Aaron Colvin to a pretty big deal, their nickel cornerback, and I love Jair Alexander from Louisville. I think he's going to end up being a very good cornerback in this class. He can play man, and he projects as a guy who can play inside, outside as well. So I'm adding a strength and potentially giving them just another guy who can neutralize players on the outside and a very valuable position in cornerback.
The Minnesota Vikings are on the clock, and, well, they would have taken a quarterback if they did not sign Kirk Cousins, but they decided to give a big investment to Kirk Cousins, a fully guaranteed 3-year deal investment to Kirk Cousins. And so the quarterback position is solved, leaving the fountain of youth cornerback Terrence Newman as a free agent. And bunch of other needs. The fact that they still need a cornerback, they do need an offensive tackle, offensive guard. Had Will Hernandez at least fallen down that far, I think he would have been a great pick here. However, they do need a tight end that can complement Kyle Rudolph. And I think that the best way that you can do that is by getting the tight end from South Carolina. So I have them taking Hayden Hurst from South Carolina.
I think that's a reach. I don't think Hayden Hurst will go probably until potentially round 3, because he is going to be 25 years old and just doesn't have a trait that really separates him. I'm just really not very high on this tight end class at all. So we'll see what happens, but that's one pick. I think when the draft rolls around, he's going to be taken much later than the first round. But we'll see what happens. I could be completely wrong.
It's the beauty of the mock drafts.
Yes, exactly. All right, well, now the Patriots are on the board, and they're just going to let the board fall to them the way they want it to and take the best player there, and that's Darius Geis, running back from the Louisiana State University. They do not have an inside runner going forward this year. They tried to work with Gillislee. He kind of got in the doghouse with some fumbles. They don't have a Blount, and Darius Geis could end up being the best running back in this class. And you have a guy like Brady, you can get him a weapon like Geis that can take a little bit of the stress off and help them grind some games. I mean, Patriots are not a team that normally takes running back in the first round. Last time they did that, I think it was Lawrence Maroney, who ended up being a big bust, but I think Geis makes a lot of sense here and can really help that Patriot offense grind out some wins in some cold games.
Well, not to maybe even go a string of tight ends here, but if I'm the Philadelphia Eagles, it's a team that doesn't really have a lot of holes, although they did lose Trey Burton in the offseason. So if I'm the Philadelphia Eagles, I'm drafting a guy that could potentially give them a strength and, further the offensive, I guess, juggernaut a little bit. And I have the Philadelphia Eagles taking Dallas Goedert.
Right in from South Dakota State.
That's right.
All right, well, some of the best guys still available that top of round 2. Some teams will be fighting with each other to go get them. Nick Chubb, running back from Georgia, still available. Cortland Sutton, wide receiver from SMU. Billy Price is an interior offensive lineman from Ohio State that Vikings have been linked to heavily. You still got Deron Payne from Alabama's there. DJ Moore from Maryland could end up being the best wide receiver in this entire class. Justin Reed, safety from Stanford, had a killer combine. A lot of teams are very high on him. And James Daniel from the University of Iowa. So some talent still available.
Overall impressions of the draft, I mean, not, overly impressive, I guess, on tight end. But, I mean, I think that that's just because they're a little sketchy a little bit on the tight end class. But overall impressions of the way that this mock draft unfolded, a lot of reaches on my part.
It's who knows? What one team needs and what one team sees. It always feels like there's a reach. The only one that I think is not going to happen is the Hayden Hurst one. Everything else I think is a viable option. I just think Hayden Hurst will go much lower than that personally. I think this is you got a lot of tight end 2s and tight end 3s that'll go rounds 3 through 5, but I don't see any tight end that I think will go in the first round unless you have a team like the Eagles, who I could see taking a guy like Goedert with the last pick here, just because they're not going to be able to get him the other way around. If they love him for their offense, then that's it. But Hayden Hurst is the only one that I personally I don't see them going that way.
Yeah, and there's still decent quarterbacks still available. I mean, the Patriots are probably the one team that has been attached to Kyle Aletta probably more than any football team. And if they wanted to go get their quarterback down in the second round, I mean, they could. I mean, so I think that that's the thing, is that there's still some room that if there was trades, this is that one where there probably would have been a lot of trades frankly, especially with Vita Vea falling down. Let's see, Harold Landry falling down. Maybe Minkah Fitzpatrick to a certain degree. I think that there probably would be some trades, at least in the scenario. And I mean, agree, disagree?
Oh, there'll absolutely be some trades. It's just who knows when and where. Who saw the Bears trading up to number 2 last year from 3? Who saw the Chiefs moving up from Patrick Mahomes? So there'll definitely be some shockers, but that's the draft. It's always pretty unpredictable, and it's one of the better live entertainment sporting events that isn't actually a sport in all of professional entertainment. So I love it. I mean, I've been a huge fan of it for years. There's a reason that I write about it and do a podcast about it and get way in deep. I mean, we started the draft podcast back in October, so it's been 6 months of it. So we're ready for it to get here, but it's absolutely a passion project, and I'm just ready for it to see how it plays out, and but let some of the arguments fall to the wayside and just spin it the way you can to see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nick, thank you very much for your time and diagnosing the the odd numbered picks and drafting Baker Mayfield for the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, no problem. And make sure you listeners head on over to Mile High Huddle. I know it's a different site than what you work for, Cam, but a piece actually right before we went on, my 3,000-word quarterback piece came out on. It was a 6-point argument on why the Broncos should target a quarterback with the 5th pick if the right guy is there. And I mean, it's about as in depth as a piece can be considering the argument. So go over and check it out. I got stats, I got references, I got historical things that I call back to. So it's a doozy, and hopefully if you go in thinking no way the Broncos should take quarterback there, maybe I can move you a little bit more to the middle.
Well, and I will make sure that I promise that in the next mock draft that I do, that I will take Josh Rosen for the Denver Broncos.
Oh man, making my heart flutter.
He's Nick Kendell. You can follow him at Nick Kendell MHH. You can follow me at Cameron Parker PO. Nick, thank you very much for your time, and we will do it again. Hopefully here before the mock draft rolls around to do maybe a mock draft 2.0.
Heck yeah, and it's going to be here soon. So thanks for having me on. Always appreciate it, and good luck with everything. Hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend.
You as well. All right, man. You have a great rest of your weekend also.
Talk to you later.
All right. That was Nick Kendell, and want to thank him very much for tuning in to the Cameron Parker Show. To all the listeners, you can hear us on Spreaker, iTunes Radio. Subscribe to the Cameron Parker Show podcast on iTunes. And we want to thank you very much again for listening to the Cameron Parker Show.
I'm chilling on a dirt road, laid back swerving like I'm George Jones. Smoke rolling out the window and ice cold beer sitting in the console. Memory laid up in the headlights has got me reminiscing on them good times. I'm turning off a real life driving, that's right, I'm hitting easy street on mud tires. Back in the day, Potts Farm was a place to go. Load the truck up, hit the dirt road. Jump the barbed wire, spread the word. Light the bonfire and call the girls. King in the can and the Marlboro man. Jack and Jim were a few good men where you learn how to kiss and cuss and fight too. Better watch out for the boys in blue. And all this small town, he said, she said. Ain't it funny how rumors spread like I know something y'all don't know? Man, that talk is getting old. You better mind your business, man. Watch your mouth before I have to knock that loud mouth out. I'm tired of talking, man. Y'all ain't listening. Them old dirt roads is what y'all miss. I'm chilling on a dirt road, laid back swerving like I'm George Jones. Smoke rolling out the window and ice cold beer sitting in the console. Memory laid up in the headlights has got me reminiscing on them good times. I'm turning off a real life driving, that's right, I'm hitting easy street on mud tires. I sit back and think think about them good old days, the way we were raising our southern ways. And we like cornbread and biscuits, and if it's broke around here, we fix it. I can take y'all where you need to go, down to my hood, back in them woods. We do it different round here, that's right, but we sure do it good, and we do it all night. So if you really want to know how it feels to get off the road, trucks and four wheels, jump on in, and man, tell your friends we'll raise some hell with a blacktop in. I'm chilling on the dirt road, laid back, swerving like I'm George Jones. Smoke rolling out the window, and ice cold beer sitting in the console. Memory laid up in the headlights, it's got me reminiscing on the good times. I'm turning off a real life driving, that's right, I'm hitting easy street on rough tires. That's right. Chilling on a dirt road, laid back, swerving like I'm George Jones. Smoke rolling out the window, and ice cold beer sitting in the car.